The best way to start this lore is by saying that I, unlike probably everybody else, do not believe that Artorias was a great man. He's a betraying piece of shit. But we gotta build up to that. Oh, also, I do plan on still pronouncing it Ornstein. Please try and deal with it, because there just isn't proof either way. What's that? You bet your ass Ornstein is involved in this lore. At least a little. Right off the bat, before I even entered the new areas, I discovered some lore. The broken pendant reads, half a broken stone pendant. The vine appears to originate from Oolacile. A powerful magic can be sensed from this ancient stone. Yet men of this time can neither manipulate nor sense its power, which has a distinct air consisting of both reverence and nostalgia. It is the newly added crystal golem in the Duke's archives that relinquishes this item, allowing access into the past of Oolacile. After some thought, I believe that the golems are all former residents of Oolacile, converted via experimentation. A golem drops the broken pendant, and there are other golems hanging around what we know to be the entrance to Oolacile. On top of that, Dusk herself is transformed into a golem. There's a possible wrench in my theory. There are also golems in both the Duke's archives and the Crystal Cave. However, allow me to also point out that Sieglind is transformed into a golem at that same location. She's not a resident of Oolacile, though. She's from Katarina. How then did she and all those Oolacile residents become golems? Seath. It boils down to more of his experiments. It's hard to predict if some residents came to Lordran and then Seath transformed them, or if he kidnapped them for that purpose. I also can't say if those golems by the lake escaped there upon Seath going mad, or if they were put in that location perhaps to help guard the Oolacile entrance. Either way, whichever of those are true, or if any, the golems are another of Seath's experiments. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the big beats of what happens in the new content. It's old, that's the first thing. Manus hauls us to the past, to Oolacile sometime between 1,000 and 300 years ago. I wish I could pin that down more, but the only two pieces of evidence we have that it's even a time jump is dialogue from Dusk and Elizabeth saying so. Neither of them are specific about that time frame, but I believe the content to take place closer to the present than to the founding of Anor Londo, and I'll explain why. Also, to be fair, Chester also talks about it being the past, but I believe him to be a flourishing liar, so I discredit his words even when they collate with what other characters say. I will explain my opinion on Chester later on. Returning to the time frame then. Gough is retired, and seemingly so is Kieran, while Ornstein is nowhere to be found around Oolacile. I believe there is a good reason he is not, but that's another thing that we'll come back to. As for Kieran being retired, I offer this proof. She gives up her weapons in trade for Artorias' soul. She no longer needs them. As Gough says, what good is a dog without a hare to hunt? Both he and Kieran are relics of a past necessity. It is Ornstein that has secured himself a place in Anor Londo, but not because he abandoned his friends. Knowing these things, I believe the expansion events take place closer to 300 years than 1,000. We don't even know that it's 300 as a minimum. Dusk states that it was many centuries ago. I've argued the usage of specific words in previous Dark Souls lore vids, and my Kingsfield lore specifically. I would not count 100 or 200 years as many centuries, so I set 3 as my minimum. Moving on, as you traverse the ruined past of Oolacile, you find that Artorias is there, a monstrous, possessed, hovel version of himself. It's important to note right now, before saying another word, that the player did not come to the past for Artorias. It was Manus that brought us here, and I don't think he gave two shits about Artorias. The reason Manus grabbed us was because of the broken pendant item found in the Duke's archives, dropped by a crystal golem. I've already established that this, and all the golems, are residents of Oolacile. Why did this resident have the pendant piece? It's probably best if I now break down what Manus is, where he came from, and why Artorias sought him. You see, the new content is not as clear-cut as it seems at first. The story is still hidden away, similarly to how it always is. Much in the same way that Izalith created the Bed of Chaos in an attempt to copy the First Flame, the powers that used to be in Oolacile called upon Manus. History does repeat itself time and time again. Why do I think this? To start with, the crystal golem in the Duke's archives, a transformed Oolacile resident, has the broken pendant item. Securing it is what activates Manus to grab you. The last line in the description for that pendant reads that it has a distinct air consisting of both reverence and nostalgia. Then also, Dusk has some new dialogue. I still think on that creature from the abyss that preyed upon me. My faculties were far from lucid, but I quite clearly sensed certain emotions. A wrenching nostalgia, a lost joy, an object of obsession, and a sincere hope to reclaim it. Could these thoughts belong to the beast from the abyss? But if that were true, then perhaps it is no beast after all. Oh, please forgive my ramblings. It's just that I wish to know the truth, and no one, not even loving Elizabeth, will tell me. The point I'm trying to make here is that Manus wanted that pendant back, and badly. He wanted it so powerfully that he broke through time. Why would he want this pendant? He even captured Dusk simply to lure the player down. He never cared about having or doing anything to Dusk, as we know she left the experience entirely unharmed. This is why I believe Manus wanted that pendant so badly, because of an item formerly belonging to Artorias, the silver pendant. As to why Artorias no longer has this pendant, that will have to wait, but for now its description reads, one of the ancient treasures of Anor Londo, presented to Artorias for facing the abyss, effectively deflects the dark of the abyss, especially in its magic forms. This pendant allows passage into the abyss without being affected. I have every reason to believe that the broken pendant Manus seeks allowed for the same, or at least, in his case, allowed for a sense of sanity and mental function. It was an item of his past self, and he requires it for nostalgic purposes. Why then, good God, why did someone, likely a trained scout from Oolacile, thief this pendant and venture all the way to Anor Londo with it? Surely their intention was not to be golemized, but that's what happens when you run into Seath. To answer that question requires a fair amount of conjecture, but it is at least based off of one item description, the purple coward crystal. Ahem. Victory in this battle once led to the ancient Anor Londo, but even in the absence of its overseer, capitulation is a disgrace. In the name of a warrior's honor, do not quickly resort to use of this crystal. What in the name of Jupiter is that description talking about? I'll tell you my theory, but hold on to your butts, because this one item caused me to alter my concept as to how the war against the dragons got underway. Originally, if you recall, in my earlier lore videos, I stated that, in short, Nito got the first soul, Gwyn got the most powerful, and everybody else followed in line behind that. To do so, they had to die and search the flame for a soul, as undead. This all still remains true by my theory, but here comes the addendum. There was once a competition, a warrior's battle, to determine who would claim the Lord's soul and rule the world once the dragons were smited. This was known as the Battle of Stoicism. Stoicism itself is a somewhat complicated idea dating from the Greeks, but there's only one important portion I want to relay here. Yes, I'm taking this from Wikipedia, tough shit. Stoics were concerned with the active relationship between cosmic determinism and human freedom, and the belief that it is virtuous to maintain a will that is in accord with nature. Because of this, the Stoics presented their philosophy as a way of life, and they thought that the best indication of an individual's philosophy was not what a person said, but how he behaved. If you ask me, and I am, human freedom sounds like something those oppressed by the dragons would want, especially if it meant a greater place in existence. More so, someone like Gwyn and Gough may have understood that their freedom was uniquely tied to their falling, as inevitable cosmic pathing. I added Gough because even though you defeat the Abyss in the DLC, he states that the flame's fading will still occur one day. The belief to maintain a will in accord with nature could be relatable to the life centered around the bonfires, and the first flame in particular. Human tribes, living on top of the arch trees with crappy lives, likely got together and discussed a new way of life, and learned of souls to be obtained from Nito. He may have died and obtained his soul long before anyone else, as he did become the administrator of death. However, many different leaders desired to control this new way of life after becoming lords. The solution they came up with was a battle royale between the leader from each tribe. or perhaps representatives such as Havel fought. Either way, Gwyn found victory and the story plays out. This leads us back to the fact that we already know that Izalith attempted to recreate the First Flame and that Gwyn's knights had to battle her chaos demons in a war for control. As I said, history repeats, and Oolacile did the exact same thing, except they did not create a flame. No, they already witnessed the disastrous results of that idea. They much more stupidly went into the Abyss and summoned Manus. I want to make it clear that I don't actually know which happened first. Artorias being sent to deal with this Oolacile Abyss makes it sound as if Gwyn might still be in power, so perhaps the events at Oolacile occurred first, and then later on Izalith ignored the Abyss and instead chose to make another First Flame. There is another piece of evidence for this theory, the Guardian Soul, that which you get from the Sanctuary Guardian. Soul of the white-winged lion sanctuary watchkeeper, who dreaded the spread of the Abyss. The Guardian exhibited traits of several animals other than lions, suggesting that it was no ordinary beast, but rather closer to the beings known as demons. Right in the description it is called a white lion, but then, after its dread of the Abyss comes to fruition, it changes into the current shape. This is very reminiscent of the Bed of Chaos creating demons, and more so, altering the appearances of Izalith's daughters. The people of Oolacile called upon Manus in the Abyss. Now I don't have the information on how they did this, I admit that. As for surviving the Abyss in order to summon him, a question that must be answered, they did not. We can easily see that the residents of Oolacile have transformed into creatures. A line in Gough's dialogue states that the Dark of the Abyss emanates from Manus himself. Does this mean that he is the cause of the Abyss? I don't believe so. What it does mean is that his awakening caused the Oolacile residents to transform. It means that his presence has allowed for the Abyss to spread and overtake a large area. It may have happened slowly, or they may have not cared, but they were obtaining their weapon to defeat Gwyn. Then, finally, I can guess that Manus was either not strong enough to kill Gwyn, or he was unwilling. I postulate the latter, and with good reason. First, here's the description of Manus' soul. This extraordinary soul is a vicious, lukewarm lump of gentle humanity. Ancient Manus was clearly once human, but he became the father of the Abyss after his humanity went wild, eternally seeking his precious broken pendant. Also, another piece of dialogue from Gough. In this he is referring to the fate of Oolacile and the residents' responsibility. But, seduced by a dark serpent or no, they awoke that thing themselves and drove it mad. One's demise is always one's own making. So, Manus was not initially vile. He was human, in fact, and only went mad when, wait for it, someone stole his pendant that allowed him to exist in the Abyss. That was a hell of a walk for one stupid broken pendant explanation. Oolacile elected to take the pendant to Anor Londo so that Manus would go on the offensive in the hopes to retrieve the item. Now, the game is purposefully vague as to what Manus exactly is, but we do know that he is human and that the Abyss, the Oolacile portion of it at least, emanates from him. His soul is a mass of humanity. Humanity, my theories dictate, is the covenant item of the Dark Lord, the Pygmy and his progenitors, the Abyss and the Dark Rays. It is fed on by the undead so that they can rise and kill Gwyn as the Dark Lord returned. At the very end of the game, upon choosing the Dark Lord ending, Koth and all the other serpents welcome your return. They do not welcome a return, or state that you are akin to someone. Becoming the Dark Lord itself, already existed at a certain point. What if Manus is an earlier attempt at forming the Dark Lord? What if the people of Oolacile accidentally stumbled upon something that dangerous? What if the only reason it failed is because Artorias interfered? I threw that line in for you folks who are fans of Artorias. I personally don't buy it. It is Elizabeth that refers to Manus as primeval human. I'm throwing out a guess that he was the first true human to obtain a Lord Soul from the Flame, and his was the original Dark Soul. There could be 100 guesses, and they all could be wrong, about what happened so very long ago. That said, fuck it, here's one attempt. In the introductory movie of the game, the world definitely appears rather cold and dark, despite the dragons living eternally. The flame is hidden away, buried deep in the ground in probably what will become Lost Izalith. By my math, the people of the world, humans, giants, and otherwise, lived atop the arch trees, but it was a miserable life. In short, it had to be at least unpleasant, for why else would they bother to challenge the powerful, immortal dragons in the first place? That would have been a world of misery, hatred, pain, and most importantly, darkness. No fire, no technology, nothing but tribes and clans going after one another in a desperate attempt to remain alive. That sounds like a perfect world for a Dark Lord to control. I believe that the Dark Serpents, Koth, Frompt, and all the others have always existed. In a sense, they are one with the flame, a competing force of nature that will always be. What if the world before the war against the dragons was their doing, their turn? They convinced someone, a man who would later have an ancestor called the Furtive Pygmy, to retain true rule by becoming the Dark Lord. And this man's name was Manus. Light and dark push on each other, the flames dimming the strength of the shadows for a millennia, but then the darkness swallows the flame once again, eventually. Gough tells us as much, that it is inevitable. In summary, Manus ruled in a practically human form over the Dark Ages atop the arch trees. Perhaps this is the true reason Gwyn went after the dragons, so that he could gain power absolute and subdue Manus, or his ideals at least. Manus, as a version of the Dark Lord, sees fit to wait, knowing that in 1,000 years or so, his progenitor will rise and reclaim the world. It's more believable if Manus is not actually in full awareness of these things, but rather another manipulated being by the serpents, or better, their master, the darkness. Then, as already said, Manus is mutated by his massively collected humanity going wild, and he grabs his progenitor through time. Perhaps he doesn't even do this primarily to retrieve his pendant, but so that he can be stopped. He wants to be put down, so that Gwyn's disciples, such as Artorias, don't continue to fight the darkness, the abyss, so directly. Really, I don't know, and no one can. I can't wait to hear if you guys think I'm out of my gourd on this one. I'd also love to hear some competing theories. I consider this a great time to bring up that the DLC has included further proof for my explanation of humanity. It's better to have watched the previous lore vids, but just remember that I said humanity is the device of the Dark Lord, a tool of manipulation and disdain. The new spells, those from the Abyss, are fantastic with their descriptions. Dark Orb and Dark Bead include this as their last line. Perhaps a human soul is closer to matter in its humanity. The entire concept of a soul for the humans only exists when they are undead and in the form of humanity. Without it, they go hollow. The Dark Fog sorcery states, although Dark Fog is, in theory, relatively close to humanity, it also happens to be a terrible poison for humans, perhaps to reflect man's cruelty against his own. This feels reminiscent of Oolacile killing itself, of Petrus and Lautrec doing evil deeds, of Yurt killing his fellow man for their souls. Whoops, moving on. The description for Pursuers reads, Sorcery of Manus, Father of the Abyss. Grant a fleeting will to the dark of humanity, and volley the result. The will feels envy, or perhaps love, and despite the inevitable, trite, and tragic ending, the will sees no alternative, and is driven madly towards its target. So, the spell gives a momentary life force to humanity, a force of the Abyss. This will is strong and twisted, confusing, and the mass of humanity hurtles towards a target to either kill it or embrace it. Either way it does damage, as it is the darkness of the Abyss given temporary form. It should be pretty clear to any of you who have played the expansion that what I said in my 9th Dark Souls lore video was highly inaccurate. Sif and Artorias are definitely two different beings. That's something a lot of people called me out on, and I took a stab at what I thought was correct. I was wrong, and that's that. At least the game finally gave me an explanation as to how I could be wrong. Before, it was nonsensical that Artorias was not the wolf. Stupid, really, but it's fixed. We'll get to that in a moment. I need to say next that I went back and forth a bunch of times on this guy, and on what to say. Artorias is quite highly praised by those living in Anor Londo, and a lot of evidence contains words propelling that praise. I just don't buy it though, despite what everyone and every item says, and the primary reason is Alvina. First, I find it peculiar that he is called Artorias the Abyss Walker. It's clear he went mad, or some variation of madness, at Oolacile. You wouldn't give someone such a confident nickname over the Abyss after one failed attempt. That says to me that Oolacile is not his first Abyss adventure. He's not only done it before, but done it on official business. The easiest guess, and perhaps only guess, is in New Londo. It's the only other source of the Abyss as far as we know. Making the blatant assumption that Artorias did not venture into New Londo after it was flooded, he likely went in to battle the Darkwraiths, and perhaps even the Four Kings. His success is arguable, though I'm going to make the case that he didn't succeed at all. The Four Kings and the Darkwraiths still roam as if never having been touched. It was the flooding of the city that halted their advance, and it required the massive flooding to be done. Still, Artorias is claimed as something of a hero and given his title of Abyss Walker. He's even given a special item known as the Silver Pendant. This could have been given to him before his trip into New Londo, but the description states precisely, presented to Artorias for facing the Abyss. Not because he was going to, but because he had already faced the Abyss. The next thing that happens, in terms of importance to Artorias' storyline, is that Oolacile brings out another Abyss, this time one containing Manus. Keep in mind what I described Manus to be, a much more badass creature than the mutated Four Kings. Artorias is sent once again to deal with the problem, as he had already been successful enough. There lies the problem, however. His success was not true. New Londo was flooded. Why then was he praised and sent to deal with the Abyss a second time? He's a liar, that's why. The details will never be known, and it's likely that everyone will argue with me in the comments. Here is my take on what went down. Artorias goes into the New Londo Abyss. I will give him credit that at this point he was hoping to do what was best for Anor Londo. He had already proven himself in killing dragons and becoming one of Gwyn's Four Knights. No one can take that away from him, not even a guy who thinks he's an asshole. That's me, by the way. Once in the Abyss, he finds things far stronger than he imagined. A force that makes the dragons seem inconsequential. Darkness, the killing power of a godly force pushing and pulling against the flames in cosmic struggle. This same power has already turned Manus, the Four Kings, and who knows who else. Perhaps Artorias even has a meeting with a Dark Serpent. He may have killed his share of Darkwraiths first, or he may have not. Regardless, he leaves the Abyss and claims to have fought valiantly, but the force of the Abyss is too strong. By his suggestion, something more drastic must be done. Something so horrible that the denizens of New Londo are transformed into ghosts. Why would he do this? For the same reason that Izalith and Oolacile are rebelling against Gwyn. Ultimate control. Artorias now knows that he can be the Dark Lord, that he can reign supreme in the next age. He was likely human before obtaining a Lord's soul, so he is a candidate to gather humanity. This could be a push, but it doesn't even matter. Whether or not he can actually become the Dark Lord, he could have easily been lied to by those serpents. To Oolacile he goes, but not to save Anor Londo. He goes to increase his own power. He goes to destroy Manus and collect his massive amount of humanity. To be more accurate, it's doubtful Artorias would even know what awaits in Oolacile. How could he? He goes with his loyal friend Sif at his side. This is where things turn against him, however, and is where I begin my explanation as to why I dislike Artorias so much. To be clear, I dislike him as a person. As a character, he's rock out as all hell, one of the best from the Souls series. But I would want to kill him if he were a real person. If that doesn't sound too dorky. What Artorias finds in the second Abyss is not Four Lords turned evil and his covenant of weakling Darkwraiths. This time, he finds a version of the Dark Lord already intact, and not only intact, but with power running wild. So wild and strong that the Abyss itself eats away at Artorias in a manner he did not expect. It degrades his armor, his weapons, and his very soul. These things we know from any of his armor piece descriptions. The death of the item's owner can be surmised from the corrosive dark of the Abyss, and the musty azure blue tassel, once a symbol of pride and glory. It actually even hints slightly that the player would never have been able to defeat Artorias if not for the Abyss corrosion in the first place. Chester also gives this hint out after you've defeated Artorias. He acts as if impressed, but starts with the line, "I heard the Abyss found him first, but even still." In other words, the decay of the Abyss had weakened the target before your fight. And it's now finally time to uncover my reason for disliking Artorias. His betrayal. Not against Gwyn, not against the other knights, and not against Anor Londo. All those things are technically true, but it's his betrayal of Sif that really pisses me off, his closest friend and battle companion. He led her into the worst abyss imaginable and nearly got her killed. I bring Elvina back into the discussion, starting with the Cat Covenant ring. The white cat Elvina speaks a human tongue and has lived since the early Age of Fire. Elvina was a trusted friend of Knight Artorias and the Great Wolf Sith. Next, some of Elvina's dialogue, "But cometh thee not for the grave of Sir Artorias. My advice true, forget this. The legend of Artorias art none but a fabrication. Traversing the dark, 'tis but a fairy tale. Have thine own respect, go not yonder knocking for nothing, I say." She also mentions quite clearly betraying your fellow Covenant members is the worst offense. This is true for all Covenants in respect to themselves and their conduct, except Elvina is the only one who mentions this aside from Gwyndolin. Why would she lie about the Abyss so boldly? We know with definitive proof that the Abyss exists, and that Artorias and Sif both are tied to it. Elvina was a close friend to the pair. Artorias led Sif into the Abyss, unconcerned for her safety, and nearly got her killed. We know that Elvina is aware of all this because she calls upon the player to rescue the friend that has not turned into a dark monster. Basically, Artorias betrayed Sif, Elvina knows all about it, and is forever upset over this occurrence. Thankfully, there is some redemption awaiting Artorias. He doesn't allow his grave mistake to completely end Sif's life. A sacrifice is made, of sorts, that of leaving his shield behind, which somehow creates a protective barrier. This barrier is seemingly permanent because it was probably created long before the player arrives, and Artorias left that location, also leaving Sif behind. Artorias also leaves behind his greatsword, a weapon that Sif will continue to use until the day we kill her. This is the proof I spoke of, the link that allows Artorias and Sif not being the same person to not be stupid. You see, before this event we were using Sif's soul to create Artorias gear. That's like if your name was Bob, you selling me Jim's stuff. I'd call the cops if that were the case. But now there is finally a reason that Sif's soul can be used to create the swords and shield of Artorias, because she's had them in her possession. I'm much relieved to find out that I was wrong, and with a reason attached. Thank you, thank you. Artorias deliberately gave them to her. He was willing to do so because he now had the Abyss Greatsword. I don't understand how he could have gotten this blade, or when, but perhaps it was an item granted during his first trip into New Londo, and perhaps Sif had been using the Greatsword of Artorias since then. I also don't fully understand why, or how, there are two versions of the Greatsword, normal and cursed. One is a representation of the honorable man who earned the respect of all of Anor Londo, and the other is a representation of the man who succumbed to the Abyss. Back on track, his leaving behind the shield that is a barrier for Sif causes him much damage, apparently. When fighting him, you'll see that his left arm is limp and nearly useless. It doesn't actually make sense that simply giving up his shield would cause this harm, so it's more likely that it got hurt in the process of protecting his friend. That leaves the question of Artorias' grave and the Covenant ring. The ring is likely an item he crafted to allow Sif to traverse the abyss with him. By the way, I can't recall if I stated this in the previous video, but I would claim that Sif is only so large because of the abyss. The creature you rescue in Oolacile does not appear to be a puppy, but rather a fully grown grey wolf. It doesn't look as if it has more growing to do. Obviously, though, you fight something much larger in Darkroot. That grave also probably has an easy answer. It was constructed to help preserve the honor that Artorias once held. It is also likely a deterrent from the truth to draw would-be abyss seekers to the wrong location. If everyone justifiably believes that Sif is guarding the grave of Artorias, they would only go to that location and never to Oolacile. That's probably what all those swords around the grave are, those that have died hoping to uncover the legend of the abyss, by Sif's hand. This seems as good a time as any to point out that the crest of Artorias, the key used to unlock the section of Darkroot that leads to both Elvina and Sif, is the same symbol that is on Artorias' true grave in Oolacile. The grave was seemingly constructed by Kieran. I don't know who made the crest, perhaps Elvina? Was this a further attempt to hide the truth, removing the grave and giving a piece of Artorias further use in the world? Hey, wait, you ask. What about the silver pendant that I brought up before, you ask? If Artorias had that, he shouldn't have been further affected by the abyss, right? Well, there's a few answers for that. The abyss is already a part of Artorias by that point, so the pendant may have been doing nothing for him. Another idea is that he accepted it to assist his betraying plan, and then discarded the item in Oolacile where he would not be watched as closely. There's even the idea that he had graciously accepted the item. He wore it in the hopes of it actually giving assistance. However, as stated, the Oolacile abyss is far stronger and the silver pendant may have been overpowered. That's reasonable enough to believe, because while Artorias is certainly not himself, he's still practically humanoid. For comparison, just think about how the Four Kings and Manus appear. Far more like monsters. One last thing. As I much spat on Artorias, it would seem, by my math, that he was doing his best to find redemption. We don't come across him attacking Kieran or Chester, but instead an abyss-mutated Oolacile resident. He does attack us, but as you know, we are simply another tool for the darkness. Artorias may sense in the player the same horrible feelings that Manus gave, and decide to take us down. What of the other three knights? As stated, it's difficult to pin down in the timeline when these DLC events take place. We don't know if Gwyn has sacrificed himself in the first flame or not, if Gwynevere has left and been replaced by an illusion, if the first son has been banished for whatever terrible thing he did, or if Gwendolyn is secretly in control of Anor Londo. We know that Kieran and Gough are both retired. The latter says as much, and I already claim that Kieran likely is as well, as she's willing to give up her weapons in trade for Artorias' soul. That opens the question of what they are both doing there in Oolacile. The obvious answer is that they came for Artorias in one fashion or another, but perhaps the answer isn't so obvious. There's one tiny piece of dialogue from Gough that makes me suspicious. When speaking of the abyss and the player's intent to traverse it, he says the following: "I suspect thou hast taken a gander at it, but the dark of the abyss, which swallowed poor Artorias, threatens to devour our entire land of Oolacile." He uses the word our, as if at least he belongs there. I've lived in several different cities now, and I still never referred to any of them as our. This suggests to me that Gough, at least, is from Oolacile. Referring back to my concept of tribes battling for the founding of Anor Londo, perhaps Gough was a resident of Oolacile who caught Gwyn's eye. He was recruited because of his awesome archery skills, that which could take down dragons. At the same time, while it is believable that Kieran might only be hanging around until the Artorias situation is resolved, because characters in From titles do that frequently, there's a chance she is also from Oolacile. I mean, why not? We know that the majority of the residents are not giants. Unfortunately, even if Gough is an Oolacile resident, he is not there by choice. Although he doesn't seem to be eager to leave, he is a prisoner. He's locked in a tower, but that can be seen as merely a game mechanic. He spends his days carving away strange plaques, which the first part of each description reads, "Head carved of arch trees by Gough in his imprisonment." Gough imparts emotion to each and every completed carving, which helps him achieve personal enlightenment. When a head is disturbed, it speaks, reflecting the emotion conferred to it. Who would imprison him? The same people that ruined his vision? His helmet reads, "Received as a decoration of knightly honor." A helm crafted especially for the honorable Hawkeye Gough. Only the eye holes were packed with tree resin by those who dismissed Gough as a brutish giant. The answer isn't there, but he's in Oolacile, and it's doubtful that Kieran, Artorias, Calamite, Elizabeth, Manus, or even Chester were able to lock him away and pack the eye holes of his helmet, giving him the belief that he is blind. It's doubtful for varying reasons pertaining to each of those individuals. Kieran wouldn't want to do such a thing to Gough. Artorias is half mad and is far more likely to kill him. Calamite is a dragon, so again, he would kill. Elizabeth is an immobile mushroom, Manus is trapped in the abyss, and Chester is one undead human. The swarm of mutated residents of Oolacile, then? That sounds right to me, except something is weird. The helmet's description makes it sound as if a society, or at least a group, faked him blind. They did not seal his helmet because he was a threat, or might go after Manus. They did so because he appeared as a brute. Just to throw out a guess, perhaps it was done early on after Manus was revived. Artorias had come and had been allowed down because he was being manipulated by the abyss. Gough attempted to convince the Oolacilians that Artorias needed to be stopped, and they used the excuse of him being a dumb brute to dismiss his pleas. That's the best I could come up with, but I don't even feel confident about it. I have two more things to discuss with Gough, the first being his words about dragons. "The dragons shall never be forgotten. We knights fought valiantly, but for every one of them we lost 60 of our own. Exhilaration, pride, hatred, rage. The dragons teased out our dearest emotions. Thou wilt understand one day. At thy twilight, old thoughts return, in great waves of nostalgia." Aside from being one of the greatest video game quotes, in my opinion, is Gough trying to say that in some way the dragons caused the powerful emotions against them that led to their undoing. He is also the person who states that one's demise is always one's own making. As soon as I heard him say this line, I couldn't help but think of Gwyn. Gough also tells us with certainty that the flames will fade. Is all of this his way of saying that Gwyn has brought the end upon himself? That, after it is all said and done, the player will sit upon a dark throne and never be able to forget all the lords and demons that were slain? A great wave of nostalgia. I'm speaking ineffectual, however, and I unfortunately don't have a greater point. What bizarre fact I do want to bring up is that Calamite is still alive. The ancient dragon in Ash Lake is hidden away, and the undead dragons are just that, undead. They are nearly harmless. Calamite, however, is not. Gough grounds him in one arrow, and it would seem easy enough for a squadron of dragon slayers to finish him off. Hell, it's already been admitted that they lost comrades 3-1. So what's one last push to make sure the dragons are dead and gone? I know it's cool to have a real dragon to fight, but the whole thing seems silly. Perhaps even lazy on the developer's part. It's particularly weird that the game flat out lies in the description of the Obsidian Great Axe. This Great Axe, one of the rare dragon weapons, is formed by the tail of the one-eyed black dragon Calamite, the last of the ancient dragons. Liar! We know there is a baby dragon still remaining. This got me thinking, and I'm 100% speculative here, but the baby in Ash Lake is awfully dark in color. Most of the dragons we see in the intro video are lighter in color, even white. What if Calamite cannot actually die, and is simply reborn in Ash Lake, or finds its way to Ash Lake to hide after its rebirth? Now, my last point when it comes to Gough. He's a giant! We already saw one giant, the blacksmith in Anor Londo, but that could have been a coincidence, someone brought into the fold because of his smithing skills. Gough is a member of Anor Londo, however, a highly valued member. I've read arguments against Gwyn, Guinevere, and other important lords being larger than normal, but I always knew I was correct. Gough is finally my proof. The false image of Guinevere is likely overinflated, but I'd wager 1,000,000 souls that she is the size of her statue in the Anor Londo church. Gwyn is the same, except his size has shrank considerably as his power has, as much of him was devoted to kindling the flame. I've said this in the past, but it now bears repeating that Gwyndolin is likely only human-sized because his mother was human. I've already stated that they are all likely humans before finding their souls in the flame, and it would be those souls exactly that made them so large, as lords. The only thing I have left to say on Kirin is that she is not a Cyclops. The porcelain mask she wears has a description of, "The Cyclops headpiece is common to all of the Lord's blades, but Kirin was determined to adorn this soft porcelain mask as a unique decoration of honor. The mask is lined with ivory locks of hair. The helmet is Cyclopean, not her. Besides, if you put the thing on and get a good view by standing near a wall, there are 2 clear normal eye holes and a third for decoration, or maybe even a tactic of putting fear into one's enemy. Her armor set confirms this is a goal, as it says, "These deadly women shift nimbly between layers of darkness, etching streaks of gold into the night air, and planting visions of terror into the minds of their targets." What of Ornstein, then? It's already been said, basically, so to quickly summarize. After the dragon-slaying war, he nets himself a position as Guinevere's protector. Artorias is sent to the Abyss twice, and maybe Ornstein is aware of his betrayal, or maybe not. Either way, the other 3 knights are out of commission, and Ornstein remains in a position of honor. His duty is a farce, as at some point Guinevere is replaced with an illusion. He likely knows of this, of course, as even the Silver Knights are aware. Moving on to Chester, the last element of this DLC to be discussed. I think that he is a blatant liar. As far as I figure, he's not from the present time at all. I know he says the opposite, and even guesses your circumstances precisely, then claiming them as his own. However, when he lumps himself into also being snatched by the shadowy hand, he does not sound believable in my opinion. Even if that can be argued, and it's understandable that I will be alone in this, Chester also says this line: "Believe it or not, Oolacile has brought the Abyss upon itself. Fooled by that toothy serpent, they upturned the grave of primeval man and incited his ornery wrath." That's great information, but wait a damn minute. How would Chester know any of that? Who is he to know any of that? Gaull's chamber is not unlocked, Kirin only appears upon Artorias' defeat, and Elizabeth does not give such dialogue. Another thing, Chester is the only Black Phantom in the game that I am aware of that exists as a person still after he has been defeated. He invades, you kill him, and then you can still go and speak to him as well as make purchases. Not only that, but his dialogue changes to that of loathing. "Oh, you have quite some nerve, or are you just thick? Well, you've quite the nerve, I've had enough of you." He is referring to the fact that you defeated his invasion and are now daring to speak to him, or you are thick-headed and don't understand what occurred. What did occur? I believe Chester to be a dark wraith, but not one from the present time. He is an entity of the past, perhaps one of the few who escaped before New Londo was flooded. Or perhaps Artorias was aware of his movements. He is not a mindless black phantom like all the others we can encounter. I also offer this line, "Oh, for Juniper's sake, put some spring into your step," as evidence. Most of you will already know, but Juniper is a Welsh translation of Guinevere. He uses her name in the same fashion as a person in real life saying, "Oh, for God's sake." I wouldn't expect anyone from the present time to say such a thing, But someone from when Guinevere might still be around? Sure. Finally, when you kill Artorias and return to speak to Chester, he says this. Did you really slay Knight Artorias? I heard the Abyss found him first, but even still. That's absolutely treacherous. Yes, magnificently so. He does not sound upset, concerned, or even impressed. He sounds whimsical. I postulate that he is delighted by your slaying of Artorias, because it means the half-threat against Manus has been removed. Or better yet, that the path is now open for the undead to reach Manus and further the strength of the Abyss. I won't pretend that his armor set description does not exist. Black leather clothing worn by Marvelous Chester, a man of mystery lost in the past. This exquisitely sewn aristocratic suit allows its wearer to move in silence, lending well to stealth. It says right there that he is lost in the past, but it never states that he is not from there. The past is a time period in reference to our player, and he could easily be lost in it while it's still being his present. Besides, being a lone dark wraith could be a definite reason to feel lost.